We are now going to look at solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. But before we actually start using that formula, I'm going to introduce the concept of what is called imaginary numbers, okay? And what happened is, historically in mathematics, we kept getting square roots, and sometimes we would end up with the square root of a negative number, such as -1, or such as -9, or something that wasn't even a rational negative number. And the mathematicians kept looking at this and looking at this, and they said, we've got to be able to do something about this. We've got to have a way to express this the square root of a negative number. So they came up with what was called an imaginary number. And so they said, we will define an imaginary number as the square root of -1. And they gave it the letter I. So by doing this, this now enables us to express this, because this would be the square root of -1 times 9, which means the square root of -1 times the square root of 9. Well, you know right here that the square root of -1 by definition is I, and the square root of 9 is 3. So as long as this is a whole number, we would write this as 3I. Okay? But if it stays as a square root, we put the I in front instead of behind the number, because people slide that I underneath the square root symbol. And we don't want that to happen. So let's look at a couple more numbers like that. For example, the square root of -75. This is equal to the square root of, this would be 25 times 3, -1 times 25 times 3. Break this up into the square root of -1 times the square root of 25 times the square root of 3. This is equal to 5. This is equal to I. So this then is equal to 5 times I times the square root of 3. And we do this so the I doesn't slip underneath the square root sign, which happens a lot if you put it at the end. Okay? So now you know what to do with those imaginary numbers. Okay? So now let's look at the quadratic formula. And we can use the quadratic formula to solve any quadratic equation, okay? Whereas factoring doesn't solve all quadratic equations. And so when things get more difficult and you look at it, you can't figure out how to factor it, the quadratic formula is a really good way to go. So what comes from here? We use this on equations of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. In other words, a number times the x squared plus a number times x plus a constant called c. And this has to equal 0. Okay? So the quadratic formula is this. X is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4 times a times c. All of that is over 2 times a. Now, this formula has to be memorized. But there's a song that can help you memorize it. And my throat is really dry, but I'm going to go ahead and sing it. X equals opposite b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X equals opposite b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So sometimes learning a song with things can help you to memorize it. But if you write it down every single time you do it, it won't be long until you know this quadratic formula. The a and the B and the C are the coefficients from your equation. So usually the easiest way to do this is simply identify the A, B, and C, plug it in your formula, and then continue on. So let's look at an example. 5x squared minus 7x minus 6 equal to 0. Okay, so let's look first at A, B, and C. A is equal to 5 because it's there. B is equal to negative 7, and C is equal to negative 6. So now that we've identified A, B, and C, let's put it in our formula. X equals the opposite of B. Well, if this is negative 7, the opposite of negative 7 is a positive 7, plus or minus the square root. Negative 7 times negative 7. It has to multiply times itself, minus 4 times A, which is negative 5, times negative 6, all over 2 times 5. So x is equal to 7 plus or minus square root. This is 49. Minus minus is going to be plus. That's 20 times 6 is 120. So this is going to be 169. All over 2 times 5, which is 10. Okay? 169 is 13. So this is equal to 7 plus or minus 13 over 10. Well, 7 plus 13 will be 20 over 10, which is equal to 2. And 7 minus 13 will be negative 6 over 10, which is equal to a negative 2 fifths. No, yeah, negative 2 fifths. No, negative 3 fifths. Divide by 2, negative 3 fifths. So as you can see, this one we probably could have factored, but it wasn't too bad to put it in the quadratic formula. Okay? Okay, so let's look at another one. X squared minus 10x is equal to a negative 24. Remember, by definition, your equation has to equal 0. This doesn't equal 0, so we have to make it equal 0 by adding 24 to both sides. That becomes 0, so we have x squared minus 10x plus 24 is equal to 0. And that one would be easy to factor, but we're not going to. We'll go ahead and do it. So A is equal to 1, B is equal to negative 10, and C is equal to 24. So x is equal to the opposite of B, which is 10, plus or minus the square root. 10 squared is 100, minus 4 times 1 times 24. All over 2 times 1, which is 2. So this would be 96. So this is x is equal to 10 plus or minus 100 minus 96 is square root of 4 over 2. So this is x is equal to 10 plus or minus 2 over 2. All right. 10 plus 2 is 12. Divide by 2, which equals 6. And 10 minus 2 is 8 over 2, which is 4. let's do another one. And again, remember, it has to equal 0. So the first thing we're going to do is subtract 2t from both sides. And notice I stuck it here because it's not like terms with either one of them. So you have x squared minus 2t minus 4 is equal to 0. So a is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 2, c is equal to negative 4. So x equals opposite of negative 2, which is 2, plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 4, all over 2 times 1. So x is equal to 2 plus or minus, this is 4, 4 times 4, that's 16, 4 plus 16 will give you square root of 20 over 2. This is 4 times 5, so we'll end up with x is equal to 2 plus or minus 2 square root of 5, because that's square root of 4, times square root of 5, which is 2 square root of 5, divide by 2. We can simplify this. 2 divided by 2 is 1, 2 divided by 2 is 1, 2 divided by 2 is 1. This is going to give me 1 plus or minus the square root of 5 is our answer for that. Okay, let's look at another one. Sometimes you have to simplify before you can do anything else. Okay? We'll have to distribute that negative 3t before we can do anything. So negative 3t times t is a negative 3t squared. Negative 3t times 2 is a negative 6t equal negative 5. Now, we're going to have to bring that negative 5 over to get it equal to 0. And you have negative 3t squared minus 6t plus 5 is equal to 0. All right, so let's identify. A is equal to negative 3, B is equal to negative 6, and C is equal to 5. X is equal to the opposite of B. The opposite of negative 6 is 6, plus or minus square root. Negative 6 squared minus 4 times negative 3 times 5. Okay, so over 2 times negative 3. So x is equal to 6 plus or minus. Well, this is 36. Negative times negative is positive. Positive 12 times 5 is plus 60. So that gives you 36 plus 60 is square root of 96, all over negative 6. So, let's simplify that 96. This will be 4 times, goes in 2 times, carrying a 1, 24, and that's 4 times 6. So this is going to be 6 plus or minus. Here is my 2 the same, so it's going to be 4 square root of 6 all over negative 6. We can simplify this by dividing everything by 2. So this will be negative 3, this will be 3, and this will be 2. Okay, So x is equal to 3 plus or minus 2 square root of 6 all over negative 3. So, what do we want to do with this? Well, we can write this as 3 plus 2 square root of 6 over negative 3. Since we don't like that negative there, we can change the signs here and make that positive 3 now. And then you would have the same thing, 3 minus 2 square root of 6 over negative 3. And so this becomes a negative, and that one becomes a positive, and then that's positive, so that you can get your signs right. So now we're going to do one of these equations that is going to require us to use that imaginary idea that we introduced a little bit earlier. Okay, maybe I can get it all on before we run out of time here. Okay, x squared minus 3x plus 6 equals 0. So a equals 1, b equals negative 3, c equals 6. Okay? Looking at this thing, you have x equal to, the opposite of negative 3 is a positive 3, plus or minus the square root, negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times 6, all over 2 times 1. 3 plus or minus. This is 9 minus 24, which is going to give you a negative 15, I believe. Yep. Square root of a negative 15. There's that I. You see that? Over 2. So you have x is equal to 3 plus or minus. This is the square root of negative 1 times 15. There's that I that we are talking about, all over 2. So x is equal to 3 plus or minus I square root of 15 all over 2. And again, you can write it as the plus and then the minus. And because this has an I in it, often when we do that, we split them in half because you have your real part and your imaginary part. So we would probably write this as 3 halves plus square root of 15 over 2 times I, and then x is equal to 3 halves minus square root of 15 over 2 times I. And notice we can put it after in this case because it's not going to get under the square root because your square root has to stay with your fraction. So that works. We have one more of these to do. Okay? 9x squared minus 6x equals negative 7. Okay, just like in all the others, it has to equal 0. So we're going to have to add 7 to both sides. And that is going to give us 9x squared minus 6x plus 7 is equal to 0. Okay? Again, identify your A, your B, and your C. A is 9. B is negative 6, and C is 7. So x is equal to, again, the opposite of negative 6. You can write it out like this if you want, plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared minus 4 times 9 times 7, all over 2 times 9. So x is equal to 6 plus or minus, this would be 36 minus 4 times 9 is 36 times 7 is 252. Well, we're going to go ahead and write it out because it's pretty complex. All over 18. So x is equal to 6 plus or minus square root, and that's a negative 216. All over 18. Well, 216, how does that break down? Let's see. It simplifies to negative 1 times 36 times 6. So there's your imaginary. There's your 6. Square root of 36 will be 6. So we have x is equal to 6 plus or minus 6i square root of 6 all over 18. Now, notice 6 in common. 6 divided by 6 is 1, 6 divided by 6 is 1, 18 divided by 6 is 3. Written as a complex number, you have 1/3 plus or minus square root of 6 over 8 over 3 I. And that is the end of this lesson. As you see, it's pretty long, and it has a lot of information in it.